Welcome to CNR Fishing Masterclass. Today what I'm going to take you through is how I make a wormery. So the first thing you're going to need is 2 tubs. So the main tub, you need it a minimum of 50 litres to start with, and then you need a smaller tub, or it can be any size really, but you need 2 tubs. The first thing we're going to do is drill some holes in the tubs. So I use a 4mm drill bit, and all I'm going to do is drill holes around the outside of the tub towards the top. So I've put 5 in the short side, and then I'm just going to put around 10 or 15 in the long sides. Okay, so that's my boxes drilled. So we've drilled holes in the outside for air for the worms, and then we've drilled holes in the bottom for the drainage. So because I'm not really interested in the compost for my flowers, I just want them for fishing purely. I don't really want the juice at the bottom, so that juice will drain away through the holes and your worms aren't going to die. Conventional wormeries will be stacked high, and that's so gardeners can keep the worm juice at the bottom to feed the plants, but I'm not really interested in that. So once you've got your boxes, the next thing you're going to need is your soil. The soil I use is Irish peat moss. It's important that you use Irish peat moss because it's not had any fertilisers added to it, so it's just neat moss, and the worms aren't going to be harmed by the fertiliser. If it has got fertiliser inside the compost, your worms will just die straight away, and you don't want that because it's expensive to start. The next thing you're going to need is your worms. So I've got around ½ kilo of worms in here, and I'll introduce them once I've introduced my soil. So get your main box, what's going to be the wormery itself. And as I said earlier, it needs to be the Irish peat moss. I've already got some in the buckets here. So all I'm going to do is pour that into the wormery and just shake it about. What you need, what you're looking for, is around 3 inch deep, and that'll be enough for the worms to live in. Okay then, so once you've got the quantity right, how much peat you've got in your bucket, next what you're going to need to do is check the moisture. It's important that your bed is wet enough, because if it's not, the worms will just dry out and turn into skins. So all you need to do is just grab a handful of peat and just squeeze it really hard. What you're looking for is the water in between your fingers. As you could see then, there was water in between my fingers, and that's the right consistency for the worms. If it's leaking out of your hand, then it's too wet. Okay, and so if you can see the moisture, the wetness in between your fingers, then it's the right consistency. If it's leaking out your hand, it's a bit too wet, so add a bit more peat just to take the moisture away really. But I can't stress the importance of that moisture. So once you've got the peat in and the moisture's correct, next thing we're going to do is introduce our worms. Right, and so what we're going to do now is just introduce our worms. So the worms will normally come in a hessamine sack, and all you're going to do is simply pour them straight onto the top. Once you've poured them on, just give them a rub around so that they're separated. and try and do it in a light place, this, because the worms don't like light, they'll instantly start burying into the peat. Just leave them for 5 or 10 minutes and then come back to them. Okay then, so we've got our main wormery done. The peat's in, the worms are in, the worms have settled down, they've all got inside the peat. All you need to do now to finish this off is add a food source. All I've got is a bit of old cucumber. What you're going to do is just place this to one side of the wormery, and we're always going to feed our worms at one side. The unhappy worms will move away from the food and they'll come to the top, and you're going to lose some worms, whether it be 1 or 10, and all you're going to do is just pick them off the top and chuck them out onto some grass or something, and the birds will eat them. If you leave them in, you're going to end up getting maggots inside your wormery. The maggots won't hurt the worms, but I'm sure they're not going to do them any good. So just clear off the dead worms, and that's it. So that's done. All you're going to do with this, put it in some shade. It needs to be in shade for 24 hours of the day. You don't want the direct sunlight on getting onto your wormery. So just put your lid on and pop that into some shade. The smaller box that we've got, this is our nursery. And all we're going to do, the main wormery, you cannot touch that for a minimum of 3 weeks. So leave them to get settled down. They've got some food in there, and they'll just plod away in there. Leave that for 3 weeks, and then we've got our nursery. When you come back to the main box, what you're going to do is riddle off the peat, put your neat worms into a bucket or another box, and what's going to go through the riddle, which is why I've got a maggot riddle. So the worms will stay on top, but the moss and the eggs will drop through the riddle. And then what you're going to do is pop them straight into this nursery, and then just leave them for 3 weeks. A worm cycle, so you've got eggs, and then inside an egg will give you anything from 1 to 20 worms. What I found is it normally gives me around 2 to 4 worms is the most common, and they'll hatch within around the 3 week mark. So exactly the same as the big box, just fill it 3 inches full, and that's where you're going to put your eggs. And this is the best way I found to keep an eye on how quick your worms are reproducing. So once the worms are established, you can do it every week if you want to, but do not touch the worms for the first 3 weeks. Just let them get settled in. So that's our nursery done. We've got 3 inch of peat moss in there, and then we'll just put that box next to the other box, and we'll leave it for 3 weeks. What I'll do now is take you to a wormery that I've done 21 days ago, so 3 weeks ago, and we'll see how it's getting on. Okay then, so I've brought my wormery up. That's already established. We've got our nursery here, and I've got my main wormery underneath this box. So instead of putting lids on, I've just put another box on top of it, so it just increases the airflow in between them. What I'm going to do now is just take the lid off and have a look inside. So when I first established this wormery, I put just a small piece of cucumber in and left it for 3 weeks, and then I come back to it, and I riddled everything off. They ate all the cucumber, and what I'd done with the old peat moss, that all went through the riddle, including the eggs. So I put that into my nursery, and I've not looked at that for a further 21 days. When I riddled it all off, I put some fresh food in, and because there was happy and there was breeding, I introduced a bit more food, because worms can eat their body weight up to half their body weight per day. So if you've got a kilo worm in there, they can eat half a kilo of food a day, but that's in extreme conditions. I don't think you'll get to that stage. So I introduced half a watermelon then, half a watermelon, a full cucumber and 3 carrots, and then I've left this and I've not touched it for 21 days. So we'll open it up now and see what stage it's at. Oh my god. Okay, and so as you can see, what I was saying earlier, you'll have a few stragglers who aren't happy basically, and they'll move away from the food and they'll be on the top. All I'm going to do with these is just take them straight out. It's like 2 or 3 worms. It's not much really. And as you can see, they're all adult worms, so the lifespan isn't that long anyway. So we'll just take them out, just chuck them, give them the birds or something, and then we'll have a look now just how quick they're eating this food. So this was half a watermelon 21 days ago. I can feel already, it's just the skin. That is literally all that's left. Tiny. They've literally ate all the watermelon itself. There's a bit, now they're starting to eat the skin. We've got about a smither of carrot left. Tiny bit more watermelon skin. And this was a full cucumber. There's about a quarter left. There's a bit more watermelon there. And if we just look underneath now to see just how many worms there are. It's absolutely black with worm. Absolutely black. So what I'd do now is take the food out, put it to one side, and then I'd put all this through a riddle, put your worms back into the box, put some fresh peat moss in there if you need to, but what we want is the eggs. So there we go. So I know there's eggs in there, and that's what I want. I want the eggs out of there, put them into my nursery, and that is going to be the future of my wormery. So I'll show you my nursery now, and then we'll see if there's anything left to do after that. Well, this is my nursery. Well, I haven't touched this for 3 weeks as well. I reckon I put around 50 eggs in here, maybe anything from 50 to 70 eggs. But I'm interested to see if any have actually hatched. The cucumbers there, it doesn't look like it's been touched, but at least I knew there was food in there. That's why I put that there. So if you just go through carefully now, you can see there's absolutely loads of eggs in here. Absolutely loads. Oh, see worm straight away. Oh, look at him. Oh, blew him off my hand. Look at him. Just straight away. I know that is under 3 weeks old, because I put the eggs in here 3 weeks ago with no worms at all, and that's proof. Just pop him to one side, have a look for some more. Oh, straight away. Another one a bit bigger. Oh, there's loads of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, That's 7 straight away. 8. 9. 10. That's 10 babies straight away. They don't look too small, to be fair. They're not too small. So they probably hatch straight away. They're probably 3 weeks old, or well, they're under 3 weeks old. But what I'll do now, you could put them into another separate wormery if you wanted, and try and establish another wormery, and just leave this nursery for your eggs, and yeah, just keep hatching the eggs and put them into a different wormery, and that way you could have, for instance, 3 different wormeries, or 4. You could have one with adult worms that you'd use for actual fishing, so you could chop them up and stuff, and then you'd have one for like teenage worms, for instance, that you're growing into adults. Then you could have one for babies, and then a nursery if you wanted to go that far into it. But worms can, every 3 months, they can double their capacity. So in 3 weeks, I reckon, so it's about 6 weeks. So I left it 3 weeks for them to settle in. Then I fed them again for a further 3 weeks, left them, and I reckon they've probably doubled, if not tripled in size. But they reckon every 3 months your wormery is going to double in size. So if you've got, for instance, 1 kilo in your wormery, after 3 months you're going to have 2 kilo at least, and then in a year's time you're going to have maybe 10 kilo in there, and in 3 months after that you're going to have 20 kilo. So it pays, the longer you leave your wormery, the more worms you're going to have. And I will not touch my wormery, or I won't take a worm out for at least 6 months at least, and that's how I establish my wormery. I'm no expert on worms. I haven't been to university to learn about worms or whatever, but it's just trial and error. I've done some things wrong in the past, and I've done some things right because it's working. I know there's different things you can feed your worms, however I will only recommend what I've used, because if you put something in with your worms, for instance onions, what I know they don't like, and you kill a full wormery, well, I'm not taking the blame. So I know they love watermelon, I know they love cucumber, and I know they love carrots. So they're the 3 things I can recommend feeding them. Other people will tell you to put newspaper in. I've tried that, however it didn't do anything, and it just made it a nightmare to harvest my eggs. So I won't put newspaper in from now on, and that's it. So the three top tips I can give you really is make sure there's the right moisture in there. Do not take a healthy worm out for at least 6 months, and that'll give you your best start. And then the third one, just keep on top of the food. If your worms are happy, they're going to keep reproducing, and that's it. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you've learned something. Good luck with your wormery. See you later.